us off at number 10 is Scott Smith. Back in the 80s, one of the biggest bands was a Canadian rock group called Loverboy. I mean, Workin' for the Weekend is still played on radio stations today. So when one of the founding members, Scott Smith, seemingly vanished from reality, there were lots of questions. Back in November of 2000, after playing with his band in Vancouver at a benefit, Smith, along with 2 other friends and his girlfriend, set sail from Mexico on a 37-foot sailboat. As they were sailing down the coast, nearing San Francisco, the weather started to get rough and the waves started to get dangerous. Then, one large wave, roughly 20 feet in size, knocked over Smith and sent him shooting off the deck of the vessel into the water. His friends on board were not hit, but were in shock about what had just happened. They searched for the man overboard pole, but it had been taken by the waves along with their friend. Within 20 minutes, the Coast Guard helicopters arrived and dispatched 2 search boats that scoured for hundreds of miles to no avail. Still, his family were bound and determined to find him, so they even paid for a private search. Unfortunately, that too was fruitless. To this day, Smith's remains have never been uncovered, and no one knows if he truly did lose his life to the sea that day. Moving on to number 9, Bill Tilman. In 1977, 80-year-old Bill Tilman, who had already been dubbed one of the greatest adventurers of the 20th century, was invited to join the en avant crew, who were mountaineers sailing to the South Atlantic to climb Smith Island. The expedition was led by Simon Richardson, and the crew, like Bill, were all very experienced. But mysteriously, neither Bill or the rest of the crew ever arrived at their intended destination. Even after an extended search by the British Royal Navy, they were no closer to solving the mystery of what really happened to Bill Tilman. Moving on to number 8, Harold Holt. Nearly 2 years into his term as Australia's 17th Prime Minister, Holt vanished into thin air. Back in December of 1967, Holt, who had always been an avid lover of the ocean, decided to set out for a little trip with 4 other companions. However, on the way back to Port C, Holt insisted that the group stop by a small remote beach for a quick swim after lunch. Holt was a strong swimmer and said he knew the waters like the back of his hand, and they had done it many times before. But still, the weather was rough that day, so only one of his friends agreed to take the dip with him. His friend stayed close to shore, but Holt took a different approach and decided to venture out further, but seemingly got caught up in a wave and in the blink of an eye was gone. To this day, his body has never been found, although a 2005 investigation concluded that he could have drowned. This investigation, however, didn't stop many from theorizing that the leader had faked his own death or that he was some sort of secret CIA agent. While it does sound a bit ridiculous, technically he has never been found, so I mean the truth is still up for debate. Moving on to number 7, Bison Deli. Once a firecracker player for the NBA, at the age of 30, Bison, who had changed his name from Brian Williams, unexpectedly retired from the game and ran away to live a carefree, adventure-filled lifestyle in Lebanon and across the Mediterranean. From there, he moved on to Australia, where he began learning how to sail and bought a boat he named Hakuna Matata. Then in July of 2002, he decided he was going to set sail from Tahiti to Hawaii and invited his girlfriend as well as his older brother Miles along on the trip with him. However, Bison never made it to Hawaii, and neither did his girlfriend or the captain of the boat. The only person who was ever seen again was his brother Miles, who returned to Tahiti alone on the boat a few weeks later. However, 2 months after their mysterious disappearance at sea, Miles was arrested in Phoenix trying to buy gold with one of his brother's checks and was found using his brother's passport. Even more suspicious is that just 2 days prior, authorities had found the Hakuna Matata with its license plates removed, covered in what appeared to be patched up bullet holes and registered under a different name. Many believed Miles was very jealous of his brother's success and money and killed him as well as the other 2 on the boat and threw their bodies into the ocean. But no bodies have ever been recovered, so it's never been able to be proven. Plus, the only person who could have given a first-hand account of what went down, Miles, overdosed on insulin and died in September of 2002, leaving the entire ordeal as one big mess. mess. Next up at number 6, Austin Stefanos and Perry Cohen. In July of 2015, two teenage friends, Austin Stefanos and Perry Cohen, often went out fishing together. The boat they used belonged to Austin's family, and his dad and grandfather were very confident in his abilities to maneuver it, saying he had driven it many times. Still, the boys usually stayed fairly close to the coast. One night, however, they decided to take a trip over to the Bahamas together. So the next morning, they made their way over to the marina. Austin texted his parents at 11:25, and then the pair boarded the 19-foot family boat and set sail on their fishing trip to the Bahamas. Shortly after their departure, a bad storm started to appear, and the National Weather Service announced an official warning. But it was too late for the boys at sea. No one knows exactly what happened to them, but somewhere in the Atlantic, the two disappeared forever. The boat they had been driving was later found, with a few items on board, but sadly, the boys were never seen again. Moving on to number 5, Patrick McDermott. Famously, Patrick was the on-again, off-again partner of pop star Olivia Newton-John for 9 years between 1996 to 2005, and at the time of his disappearance in 2005, Patrick was on board a Mexico-bound fishing boat, which was apparently somewhat of a frequent activity for him. But this time, he never returned. He boarded all alone, and despite some of his personal belongings, including his car keys, passport, and wallet, which were found on the boat, Patrick was never seen or heard from again. What's especially strange is that according to the Coast Guard, there was no sign of accident, criminal activity, or an attempt to take his own life on board. The most accepted theory of his whereabouts after a PI was hired to look into the case for Dateline is that Patrick faked his own death to avoid substantial debts and allow his son to cash in on his life insurance policy. There are even some conspiracies that he remains hiding out in Mexico to this day with a new girlfriend, but officially there is no concrete evidence that that is true. Moving on to number 4, Theodosia Burr. Daughter of the 3rd Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr. If you've ever heard of a little Broadway musical called Hamilton, or just happen to be a history buff, then you may already be familiar with Miss Theodosia Burr. But one thing they left out in the show was that Theodosia mysteriously vanished from the spotlight in 1813. During her time, Theodosia was quite a controversial figure. After Hamilton alluded that her and her father had an inappropriate relationship, it's believed that that is what led to the duel where Burr killed Hamilton, for which Theodosia later helped her father flee the country. But from there, her life only got worse. It's believed the young woman suffered uterine cancer, and on top of that, wrote to her doctor sharing symptoms of hysterical fits, seeing figures in the night, witnessing flashes of light, and hearing strange noises. But once her son passed from malaria, sending her into a deep depression, Theodosia decided to go and visit her father, who she desperately missed. So she boarded the Patriot, a small boat that was scheduled to take her from Georgetown to New York, where her father had recently returned. But curiously, the boat never arrived in New York. In fact, the boat never arrived anywhere, as far as anyone could find. It was as if it vanished into another dimension. To this day, the disappearance of Theodosia Burr remains a great mystery. Moving on to number 3, Slim Wintermute. Back in 1939, the National Collegiate Athletics Association, or NCAA, held its first ever men's college basketball tournament. As is often the case with firsts, the player from the winning team at the University of Oregon, sometimes called Tall Furs, became kind of low-key celebrities in the area. One of these famed Tall Furs was center player Urgel, Slim, Wintermute, because he could dunk the ball, something that was quite the novelty at the time. Sadly, however, after college, Wintermute didn't hit the big leagues. Instead, he ended up working for an airplane manufacturer in Seattle, got married, fathered 3 kids, and lived a happy, quiet little life. But in October of 1977, he would once again become a well-known man, but this time for a much more tragic reason. At the age of 60, Wintermute and a friend went out to enjoy a little boat trip on a nearby lake. However, the next morning, when his friend awoke, he found that he was left all alone on the vessel. Wintermute nowhere in sight. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the man, whether he fell overboard or mysteriously ran away, and as no remains were ever discovered, we will never be able to fully confirm what happened. Moving on to number 2, Dan Burak and Patrick Horgan. Back in December of 1967, Captain Dan Burak and his friend Patrick Horgan departed Miami in their cabin cruiser named Witchcraft. Now, Maybe it's just me, but that does feel a little on the nose. The pair were traveling on a 23-foot luxury yacht with the innocent intention of watching Miami's Christmas light show from a nice view at sea. But after reaching just 1 mile from the shore, the Coast Guard received a call from the captain of the boat stating that the ship had hit something. The captain assured the Coast Guard it was nothing serious and that there were no substantial damage, but still the Coast Guard wanted to come out and see for himself. The Coast Guard immediately left his station and in just 19 minutes arrived at the area where the witchcraft was. Or rather, should have been. The area indicating the ship's location was completely deserted, with no signs of any ship having been stranded or even present there previously. Over the next few days, officials searched hundreds of square miles through the ocean to track down the lost ship, but they were never able to track it or the 2 men aboard. And last up in our number 1 spot, Henry Hudson. For someone whose name is plastered all across North America, very little is actually known about Henry Hudson. He was likely born around 1570 and began making his known voyages in 1607. However, it was his 4th and last voyage that remains a historic mystery. Hudson's ship, the Discovery, left London on April 17, 1610 with a crew of 23, including Hudson's son John and Rupert Jewett, who had been with him since his 2nd voyage in 1608. However, things on board were not amicable, it seems, and that September Hudson held a trial of his mate Jewett to air allegations that he was plotting to seize control. In the end, Hudson spared him from punishment but replaced him as mate with Robert Bylot. Hudson continued to sail across Hudson Bay all the way south to James Bay, at the dismay of his crew, but soon it was winter, which meant a complete and utter halt. Fast forward to June of 1611, and after a long and cold winter had come and gone, Hudson finally agreed to begin making his way back to England. However, for some reason, before leaving, he replaced his mate once again with another sailor, John King. But this would start a mutiny. By June 22nd, while stalled in ice on James Bay, a faction of the crew seized control of the ship, and Hudson, with his son John and 7 other crew members, were forced into the ship's boat and cast adrift. They were never seen again.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the SS Sultana. Starting off heavy with this list today, we have one of the worst maritime disasters in US history, and it occurred on April 27, 1865. The SS Sultana was a side-wheel steamship, and on that fateful day, it exploded on the Mississippi River just north of Memphis, Tennessee. This incident took place in a time after the Civil War had just ended, and of course, the POWs held in Confederate military prisons were eager to get back to their homes after everything they had just endured. This led to the federal government paying a hefty price to steam operators for each soldier they took with them. This then led to a whole bunch of steam operators cutting corners so that they could bank on this deal. In the case of the Sultana, this meant safety things like repairing a leaky boiler or adhering to the capacity limits were cut. At the time of the explosion, the ship was carrying as many as 2,300 people, which was over 6 times the limited capacity. Unfortunately, the neglect of the boiler led to it rupturing, which initially took the lives of hundreds of those on board. After this, the already overloaded docks were made weaker and they ended up collapsing, which left people trapped. In the end, around 1,800 people lost their lives. While I'm sure there are many Americans and others from around the world who have heard of this tragic incident by now, at the time, not many people knew about it at all. If you remembered, this happened on April 27, 1865, and President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, which ended up overshadowing this tragic event in terms of coverage. And it's not like there was a 24-hour news cycle back then where they were just constantly being bombarded with the worst of the worst. Even today, where we do have that, terrible things get overlooked and overshadowed all of the time. In our number 9 spot today, we have the MV Donna Paz. This maritime disaster took place on December 20th, 1987, when this passenger ferry collided with the oil tanker, the MT Vector. The collision took place in the Tablas Strait, which is about 180 kilometers south of Manila. This ship was carrying more than 4,000 people, which was double its capacity, and at the time of the collision, there were no senior officers on the bridge of the ship, and on the Vector, there was no lookout, and it is thought that both ships lacked a functioning radio. That's what I like to call all bad. The weather and the waters were both quite calm when the collision happened, and despite the clear visibility visibility, neither ship gave an indication that it noticed the other. When the collision occurred, the 8,800 barrels of oil and gasoline on the Vector quickly ignited and engulfed both ships in flames. Out of the over 4,400 people that were on board both ships, only 26 people were rescued from the waters and survived. It really makes you wonder exactly what happened here, because from an outside perspective, it seems like this tragedy could have been avoided. In our number 8 spot today, we have the MV Wilhelm Gustaf. This ship was a part of the Nazi Strength Through Joy program, which was an important propaganda tool during the Third Reich. This ocean liner is said to have carried German workers who were indulging in leisurely activities on cruises throughout the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, but when World War II began, it ended up being converted into a hospital ship. Closer to the end of the war, this ship then switched gears again and was called on in order to evacuate German troops and civilians from East Prussia ahead of the advancing of the Soviet troops. At this time, the ship had shed its white paint with red crosses that symbolized it as non-combatant, and this, coupled with the clear presence of troops on board, as well as the anti-aircraft guns on board, well, it was obvious that this made it a viable military target. While it was built to accommodate around 1,900 people, on January 30th, 1945, as the ship left port, an estimated 10,000 people packed on board. Just after 9:00 p.m. that night, a Soviet submarine fired 3 torpedoes at the ship, which slammed into its side. Because of ice, many of the lifeboats were inoperable, and those who were on board that were best trained to deal with these kinds of emergencies and dire situations had either been killed in the blast or were trapped below the deck. Just over an hour later, the ship slipped underwater. Unlike a lot of the other wrecks on this list, rescue did begin just minutes after the SOS call was sent out, but still only 1,200 people were saved. With a death toll of somewhere around an estimated 9,000 people, this remains one of the deadliest shipwrecks in history. In our number 7 spot today, we have the HMS Victory. This is one of the oldest wrecks we have on this list today, and this one took place on October 5th, 1744. The HMS Victory was a 100-gun Royal Navy vessel, and on October 3rd, just a couple days before the wreck, the ship was in a fleet reaching the English Channel. A storm ended up scattering the fleet all apart from each other, and on October 4th, the ships with the Victory lost sight of her. What happened to the HMS Victory remained a mystery for over 260 years, and it wasn't until 2009 that the fate was found out. Just 50 miles off the coast of England near Plymouth, the US company Odyssey Marine Exploration ended up finding the wreckage, and when found, the ship's cannons were still in good condition, with even the royal crests visible underwater, despite the nearly 3 centuries it had been. This was also the first time that any trace of the 1,150 sailors that were on the ship were found, as sadly no one in the entire crew survived the wreck. In our number 6 spot today, we have the SS Kanga. On December 4th, 1948, this ship was carrying thousands of passengers who were fleeing Shanghai due to the advancing People's Liberation Army. On this day, the official number of passengers was said to be 2,150, which was already almost double its capacity rate, but it said that several thousand more people crowded onto the ship before it left the docks. I mean, this makes a lot of sense. It's weighing the risk of packing onto this boat versus staying in the situation you're currently trying to flee. As the ship got to the mouth of the Huangpu River, it is believed that it may have struck some sort of World War II era mine or something like that, because it just exploded. Rescuers were also unaware of the explosion for hours, which only made the situation worse. Somewhere around 700 passengers were rescued, but this meant that a number estimated to be from 2,750 to as many as 4,000 people lost their lives in this explosion and the subsequent sinking of the ship. In our number 5 spot today, we have the RMS Empress of Ireland. The Empress of Ireland was a Canadian ocean liner that was out to sea on May 29th, 1914, when tragedy struck. The ship was traveling down the St. Lawrence River through some thick fog, which is what led to her colliding with a Norwegian collier, which is a bulky cargo ship that was designed in order to transport coal. The cargo ship didn't sink, but unfortunately the same couldn't be said for the Empress, as she listed and fast. Water began pouring in through portholes, which led to those below deck meeting their fate rapidly. The official death toll of the crash is said to have been 1,012 people, and it still remains the worst disaster in Canadian maritime history. It makes me wonder how, as a Canadian especially, I've never heard of this accident before. The wreck of this ship still lies lies in a fairly shallow 130 feet of water, which has made it a pretty popular diving location for those wishing to retrieve relics. In our number 4 spot today, we have the SS General Slockum. This passenger steamboat was built in Brooklyn, New York, and on June 15, 1904, it was carrying members of the St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church as they were on their way to a church picnic. They were traveling up the East River on the way to Long Island Sound when a fire started in the lamp room. Considering the fact that the lamp room was obviously filled with lamp oil, while a fire on board a ship is never good, this is one of the worst case scenarios. Actually, lamp oil, oil rigs, and nearby paint locker in a cabin filled with gasoline are actually what created this worst case scenario. The safety equipment of this ship was not nearly up to standards, as it was rarely even checked, and when the crew attempted to get the fire hose in order to put out the flames, they found a rotten fire hose that crumbled in their hands. The life jackets being given out to people began to fall apart, and they couldn't even access the lifeboats at all. I cannot even imagine the panic people were feeling at this point. Many of the passengers saw no other option and jumped into the water to try and swim, but like many Americans at the time, they didn't know how, and the heavy wool clothes they wore only worked to weigh them down. At the end of the day, it is said that around 1,021 people lost their lives in this absolutely tragic event. In our number 3 spot today, we have the MV Laulia. This was a ship that was owned by the Senegalese government, and despite the fact that it was designed to carry a maximum of 580 passengers, on September 26, 2002, the ship had at least 2,000 people on board. This is obviously a huge issue, and this, coupled with the fact that there was a large amount of people who were sleeping on the ship's deck, which is of course above the center of buoyancy, only made matters worse. The ship was en route to the Senegalese capital of Dakar, and as it sailed farther out to sea than it was licensed to sail, it ended up encountering a storm and really rough waters. The ship ended up capsizing, and out of the 2,000 people on board, only 64 people survived the entire ordeal. Not only was this because of the fact that the ship sank exceptionally quickly, but it's mostly because rescue was not sent out until several hours after. The wreck is thought to be one of the worst non-military disasters in all of maritime history. Despite the severity of the situation, no one has been charged or prosecuted for the disaster to this day. In our number 2 spot today, we have the MS Al Salam Boccaccio 98. This is a shipwreck that took place on the Red Sea on February 3rd, 2006. At the time of the wreck, the ship was en route from Dubai, UAE, on the way to Safaga in southern Egypt. When the ship left port, it was already listing due to poor weather, and things only got worse from here. A fire broke out in the engine room, and it continued to burn despite the crew's best efforts to get it put out. The crew used buckets and buckets of seawater, and at one point the fire was temporarily put out, but it reignited before long. At this point, the captain tried to turn around and return to the port, but the drainage pumps weren't working properly, which meant that the hull of the ship had now filled up with water. When they tried to turn, it just resulted in the balance being all thrown off and the ship capsized. Like I mentioned before, when they set out, the weather was already bad, which of course made the rescue efforts substantially more difficult because those people also had to try and sail through this bad weather and strong winds. This left dozens out floating in the Red Sea. Sadly, it is reported that somewhere around 1,018 people lost their lives in this wreck. In our number 1 spot today, we have the MV Goya. This ship was built in Norway in 1940 and was meant to be a freighter, but in a World War II world, this ship ended up being used as a passenger ship in order to evacuate citizens as a part of Operation Hannibal. This, of course, as anyone could reasonably imagine, meant that the ship was very often overcrowded as they were trying to rescue as many people as possible at a time. On April 16th, 1945, the ship was carrying over 7,000 passengers, which is 5 times the amount of people it could safely carry, when it was hit by a torpedo that was sent from a Soviet submarine just before midnight. The force of the explosion was so great that the ship only took minutes to sink, and since the timing of the incident had most passengers in their beds, you can imagine the outcome. Because of a lack of proper record keeping in with the absolute panic of trying to rescue people with the imminent threat of attack, it isn't quite clear exactly how many people lost their lives in this wreck, but it's thought that somewhere between 6,000 to 7,000 passed away, which is unbelievable. It is thought that there were around 180 survivors of the wreck, and due to the unbelievable tragedy, the location of it has now been officially declared a war grave by the Polish authorities.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Nina.
The Nina was a ship that was once the flagship of the New York Yacht Club, but that unfortunately changed in 2013 when it disappeared on the Tasman seas with its owner and 6 other people on board. The ship had left New Zealand and was bound for Australia on May 29th, and it was estimated to be somewhere from an 8 to 10 day trip. The last time the ship was heard from was on June 4th, and it wasn't until June 12th that the search for the ship began after friends and family of those on board began to get worried as the ship was now a few days overdue. The rescuers searched until it was called off on July 6th after they had searched 737,000 square nautical miles and had found nothing. The search was extremely thorough and they still were unable to find anything. No yacht, no debris, no life raft, and none of the people on board. The last communications with the Nina came on June 3rd and 4th as a crew member was contacting a meteorologist and router for Pacific cruisers in order to get some advice on where the ship should go so as to escape a nasty storm they were encountering. There was also an undelivered text message from June 4th that the satellite phone company was able to retrieve that stated that the storm sails had been shredded the night before and that they would update them later at 6 p.m. with the course info. This definitely wasn't an ideal situation, but the message didn't signal that they would have been in immediate distress either. Aside from these messages, there wasn't any other contact that seemed to have been attempted, despite the ship being well equipped with emergency radios, flares, a satellite phone, and all of that sort of thing. Right now, the best guess as to what happened is that the ship may have sunk really quickly following the storms, and it didn't allow any time for the passengers to activate any of the emergency equipment, but at the end of the day, this is all just a guess, and what exactly happened out there still remains a mystery. In our number 9 spot today, we have the mysterious whale die-off. Between 2015 and 2016, there was a mysterious large die-off of whales located in the Gulf of Alaska. The deaths first began to be discovered in late May of 2015 when the carcasses of endangered fin whales were found floating near Kodiak. The total of whales found in the area climbed to 30, with additional reports of 5 other whales found in the waters just off of British Columbia. Because of the difficulties in retrieving the past whales, it was almost impossible to find out what exactly was causing this. The leading suspect was a toxin being produced by algae, but when one of the carcasses that researchers were able to recover was tested, it came up negative for the toxin that they were searching for. It is possible that the decomposition that had already taken place was the cause for this negative test, but it's also equally as possible that this just wasn't the cause in the first place. The good news is that since 2016, this strange and upsetting anomaly has stopped, so the whales are safe. But unfortunately, we aren't any closer to getting answers on what exactly happened here. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Kaz 2. The Kaz 2 was a 12-meter long catamaran that set sail on April 15th of 2007 and was found adrift just 3 days later on April 18th, but without her crew. When the ship set sail, she was carrying 3 crew members, all of which were relatively inexperienced sailors. On April 18th, someone in a helicopter reported seeing the adrift ship, but it wasn't until April 20th that maritime authorities were able to catch up with the boat and boarded it. It was then, however, that they uncovered the bizarre circumstances on the ship. Everything on the ship was perfectly normal, aside from the fact that the crew had just seemingly vanished. There was a meal set on the table waiting to be eaten, a laptop was open and on, the engine was still running, all of the life vests were still on board, and all of the ship's emergency systems were fully functioning. The only out of place things were, of course, the missing crew, the fact that one of the ship's sails was badly shredded, and there was no life raft on board, but it is still unclear whether there was ever one on board. There are many theories as to what may have happened to the crew, but none have ever been substantiated or confirmed, which leaves the fate of the 3 crew members a complete mystery that we may never get the answers to. In our number 7 spot today, we have the disappearance of Bas Jan Ader. Bas Jan Ader was a Dutch conceptual and performance artist as well as a skilled sailor. He set sail on July 9th, 1975 in a ship called the Ocean Wave as he was setting sail to make his single-handed west to east coast crossing of the North Atlantic. He estimated that this trip was going to take around 2.5 months, but it wasn't until 9 months after he set sail that his boat was found unmanned, floating almost vertically in the water. The people who found the ship were Spanish fishermen who then took the boat back to Spain, where it ended up being stolen. Throughout all of this, Baz was nowhere to be found, and even still, over 40 years later, the mystery of what exactly happened remains. There are people who speculate he fell overboard in heavy bad weather, but this is of course impossible to tell, especially with neither the boat or Baz to provide evidence. The information to go on has only been what was provided by the people who saw the boat before it was stolen, so of course that is not nearly enough to really have any questions answered. What happened to Baz on his sailing trip is still a mystery, but I do hope one day we find out at least some answers. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Gulf of Mexico wreck. For almost 2 centuries, this shipwreck went undiscovered and undisturbed until the early 2000s, when a pipeline bisected it, and since then it has been plaguing those who are trying to figure out what mysteries it holds. A team was assembled in order to try and search the wreckage, but every time they attempted, something went wrong that made it impossible for them. Every time they tried, the exploration sub would malfunction right before they were able to begin checking it out. Like, I'm talking about everything, from video monitors going out whenever they fired the thrusters, to the sonar breaking, to hydraulics going haywire, one after another. After this whole ordeal, the Navy sent a research sub that pretty much just ended up self-destructing its own rover once it got into the water, and when it made its way to the wreck, its arms were too short to reach anything to collect. So this is all to say that it seems like whatever mysteries this shipwreck is holding, they are destined to remain as such. I'm starting to think that maybe this shipwreck is cursed. In our number 5 spot today, we have the disappearance of George Smith. George Allen Smith and his wife Jennifer Hagel Smith had just married and were aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, as they were doing a Mediterranean cruise for their honeymoon. On July 5th, 2005, the ship was somewhere just off of the coast of Turkey when it was discovered that George had disappeared. The night he was last seen, he was intoxicated from both alcohol as well as prescription drugs, and there was blood evidence found in his cabin as well on the side of the ship. There were 2 main theories in regards to his disappearance, the first being that his intoxication led to him falling overboard the ship, and the other was that perhaps a robbery had gone bad and foul play had been involved. This case was investigated for over a decade, with even the FBI and their mafia division getting involved at one point. But despite this, neither George, his body, or what really happened to him has ever been found. There have been many assumptions made over the years, but 16 years later, it is still a mystery. In our number 4 spot today, we have the MV Tai Ching 21. On November 9th, 2008, a Taiwanese fishing vessel was found floating, but it was empty and had been totally gutted by fire. The 50-ton ship had obviously suffered a fire, but since there was no smoke anymore, it was clear it had been a few days since the fire was put out. Upon inspecting the ship, it was realized that the ship's lifeboat, along with its 3 life rafts, were missing, not to mention the crew of 29 missing men. The last transmission from the radio of the ship was on October 28th, but after that, nothing had been heard from the members of the crew and there was no mayday call ever received. The search for the missing men spanned 21,000 square miles or 54,000 square kilometers, and searches were conducted by both the US Air Force as well as the New Zealand Air Force, but unfortunately the search turned up no results. The last radio transmission from the ship was a personal call from the captain to his wife, which took place on that October 25th, but that was the last time anyone had heard. There still hasn't been any sign of the missing 29 crew members, which of course is absolutely devastating. It is clear they must have abandoned the ship after the fire started, but their fate from there remains completely unknown. In our number 3 spot today, we have the disappearance of Rebecca Corium. Rebecca Corium was a British crew member and youth worker on the Disney Wonder cruise ship in 2011. In the early morning hours of March 22nd, Rebecca was seen on CCTV footage in the crew lounge speaking to someone on the telephone, and it appears as though the conversation was a bit emotionally distressing for her. A few hours later, people began to worry because Rebecca hadn't shown up for the start of her shift, which was really unlike her, and when people went to go and see if maybe she had slept in or something like that, they were unable to locate her anywhere on the ship, which of course made people even more worried. That CCTV footage of Rebecca is the last known sighting of her, and since then, no one has been able to figure out where she went or what happened to her. The first assumption was of course that perhaps she had gone overboard, and it prompted extensive searches of the waters in the area, but unfortunately nothing turned up. Almost an entire year after her disappearance, someone emailed Rebecca's family to say that she was 85% sure she had seen Rebecca with a man on the streets of Venice, but unfortunately this potential lead didn't turn up any real evidence or clues. Many people state that perhaps Disney Cruise Lines know more about what really happened, as other crew members have suggested that the entire ship is covered with so many cameras that there's no way that whatever happened could have been missed, but of course there's no evidence that has been discovered which would prove these allegations. It has been 10 years since Rebecca's extremely mysterious disappearance, and still no one knows exactly what happened on that terrible night. Hopefully one day some answers are found so Rebecca's family can get the closure that they deserve. In our number 2 spot today we have the disappearance of Jim Gray. Jim Gray was an incredibly important computer scientist who was responsible for many computer advancements that changed things for all of us. Other than being a computer scientist, he was also an experienced and skilled sailor, and one day on January 28, 2007, he set sail for a short trip so he could head out and spread his mother's ashes, as she had recently passed away. As he began his trip, Jim spoke to his wife on the phone and said he would call her once he got back in range. After their phone call, he called his daughter as well and left a little message for her, and then he was off on his trip, but unfortunately he never ended up returning. Jim's wife Donna was the one who raised the alarm bells as she was away on a trip, but like I mentioned, Jim said he would call her later, and he never did. At this point is when the huge searches began. Thousands of images of the area where Jim or his boat might be were uploaded to Amazon Mechanical Turk for people to look through and see if they could find any kind of signs, but to no avail. Jim also had an automatic emergency position indicating beacon on his ship, but whatever happened to Jim and the ship clearly didn't meet the requirements, or perhaps it had some sort of malfunction, or maybe it was even turned off. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jim or his boat, as no sign or trace of either has ever been found. The theories of what may have happened are endless and range from Jim intentionally disappearing to him being kidnapped for his computer skills and brain in order to do some kind of inside job, and really everything in between. There most definitely are theories that are seemingly more likely than others, but at the end of the day, they are all a possibility. In 2012, Jim's widow asked the court to declare him dead in absentia, which ended up being granted, so as of 2012, Jim has been declared dead, but that does not mean that he is. In our number 1 spot today we have the disappearance of Amy Lynn Bradley. On March 21st, 1998, Amy and her family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship en route to Curacao. On March 24th, after a fun night on the ship, Amy was hanging out and having a couple of drinks with the ship's band, and one of the members explained that she parted ways with them around 1 a.m. After this, around 5:15 a.m., Amy's father said he saw her sleeping on the cabin balcony. Unfortunately, however, once 6 a.m. rolled around, she wasn't there anymore, and this was the beginning of the mystery. Once it was realized that Amy was missing, extensive searches were launched for full days before they ended up being called off when no signs or traces of Amy had ever been found. While this is all super mysterious and nobody really had anything to go on, the plot only thickens with this story. After her disappearance, people began to report seeing Amy. One sighting was by Canadian tourists in 1998 who said that they had seen a woman who resembled Amy and who had tattoos that matched hers on a beach in Curacao. A member of the United States Navy said that he saw her in a brothel and said that she told him her name was Amy and she asked for help, saying she wasn't allowed to leave. The most recent alleged sighting comes in 2005 when a woman claimed she saw Amy in a department store in Barbados. She said that Amy entered the restroom with 3 men who then threatened her if she didn't follow through on some sort of deal. The men left briefly, and the witness said the woman turned to her, said that her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia and needed help, but the men returned right after to take her away again. This story is devastatingly sad and has so many turns, and to this day no one knows exactly what happened to Amy or if these witness sightings are accurate at all. In our number 10 spot today we have the upsweep. We all know how little we know about the ocean, and that includes what kinds of creatures lie in it. So while this mysterious sound out of context probably wouldn't be that freaky, when put into this situation it becomes quite a bit more eerie. This sound is referred to as upsweep, and it was caught when the Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory started its sound surveillance system in August of 1991. The sound is apparently more seasonal, with its peaks in spring and fall, but it is unclear if the changing of seasons is responsible for this sound, or if it's coming from something that lurks in the ocean and remains undiscovered. Just for reference, here is a clip of that sound played at 20 times the original speed. It is possible that this sound could be coming from underwater volcanic activity, but considering the fact that this has yet to be proven, I am here to ask the question, what if it's not? In our number 9 spot today we have Bermeja. Bermeja was an island that could be found on many maps spanning from the 16th to the 20th century, but in a 1997 survey, the island could not be located. In an extensive 2009 study, it was concluded that the island that was once labeled as Bermeja just didn't exist, which left a whole host of questions. The island was supposed to be located just off of the north coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, which is particularly important because if it did exist, its location would be integral to determining the boundaries for exploitation rights of oil in the Gulf of Mexico. So of course, when this island that's been included on many maps seemingly just doesn't exist anymore, people really began to speculate what could have happened. There are a few major theories with this one. The first is that the original observation of the island was incorrect, and then no one ever went to double check that this island existed. The next being that possible shifts in the geography of the ocean floor, along with rising sea levels, were the cause for this island to completely disappear. The third theory is the most mysterious out of them all, and this is the theory that the island was blown up by the CIA so as to expand the economic zone belonging to the United States. It certainly is not an easy thing for an island to just disappear, so it truly is quite a large mystery about what exactly happened here, and at this point, it is unclear if we'll ever know for sure. In our number 8 spot today we have the Sarah Joe. The Sarah Joe was a fishing boat that departed from Maui in February of 1979. There were 5 crew members aboard the boat, and when they left around 10 AM that day, the skies were perfectly clear, but while they were out at sea, the wind began to change and they ended up encountering a horrible storm. People on shore who were rightfully worried about the crew headed to the shoreline to try and wave the boat back in, but they were unable to locate the boat at all. One of the passengers' fathers even went out on a separate boat in the middle of the storm to try and see if anything could be done, or if he could at least locate the ship, but to no avail. It was presumed that all of the crew members had been lost due to the severity of the storm. The following days of course consisted of many hours of searching, but neither the ship or any of the men were located. Flash forward almost an entire decade to September of 1988, and a member of the initial search team, John Naughton, was on a wildlife expedition on a deserted atoll around 2,000 miles from Maui when he discovered a small boat and a makeshift grave. He left the site as untouched as he could and immediately contacted authorities, who were then able to confirm that the boat was the Sarah Joe, and the person buried in the makeshift grave was one of the passengers who went missing all those years ago. While experts do agree that the boat could have drifted here and it would have only taken about 3 months to do so, this area was surveyed in 1985 and there was no trace of either the boat or the makeshift grave. So where would the boat and this crew member have been from the 1979 disappearance until after the 1985 survey? These are the types of questions that still remain unanswered to this day. There are of course theories, but none that cover all the mysteries this story holds. In our number 7 spot today we have the Yonaguni Monument. Just off of the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, there is a diving location that has a high population of hammerhead sharks, making it a large and popular attraction. In 1986, a diver in the area noticed some formation on the seabed that resembled a structure of some sort. This led to a team of scientists going on a dive to gather more information, and this is when the Yonaguni Monument was officially discovered. The monument is made of sandstone and mudstones, but here's the mysterious thing. Scientists can't agree on its origins. There are some who believe that this is a natural formation, but there are some who swear that it is man-made. The stairs are over 165 feet long and 65 feet wide, which obviously means that they are strikingly huge. There are pretty reasonable arguments for both sides, and considering the fact that this thing is at least 10,000 years old, I guess it's fair that we may not have all the answers, but it certainly is strange that we can't quite figure it out. At the end of the day, I really don't want to meet whatever thing would need stairs this large. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Milky Sea phenomenon. This phenomenon is certainly much more beautiful than the name would suggest, and while we kind of know what causes it, there are still many unanswered questions that surround it. The first recorded sighting of this phenomenon occurred in 1846 when Raphael Semmes, who was the captain of the CSS Alabama, spotted it and was horrified by what he was seeing. He wrote, "From the deep blue water into a patch of water so light it startled me. The whole face of nature seemed changed, and with a little stretch of the imagination, the Alabama might have been conceived to be a phantom ship lighted up by the sickly and unearthly glare of a phantom sea." This phenomenon is so bright that it can be seen from the satellites orbiting Earth, and while it looks amazing in pictures, I can only imagine how frightening it would be to see in person when little is known about why it happens. It is believed that the glow is caused by bioluminescent bacteria that grows in all oceans in our world, but in order to produce a glow like we've seen, this bacteria has to be multiplied by billions of trillions, and we don't know how or why this happens. Also, we don't know for sure if that is what is responsible for the glow, it's just our current best guess. Just for the sake of our expansive imaginations, let's say that it really is this bacteria causing the glow. Why does it come to the ocean surface? Why in such great numbers? Every time this happens, it's at unpredictable times, locations, and sizes, so basically it remains a strange but stunning ocean mystery. In our number 5 spot today, we have the SS Beichimo. The SS Beichimo was built in Sweden in 1914 and it belonged to the Hudson's Bay Company. This ship was used to trade provisions for pelts in Inuit settlements along the Northwest Territories of Canada. On October 1st, 1931, the ship was ending its trading run and was packed with fur when it became trapped in pack ice. The crew decided to briefly abandon the ship and they traveled over the ice to the nearest town for shelter. Because of the location and the time, it wasn't exactly going to be simple for everyone to be rescued. On October 15th, the Hudson's Bay Company sent an aircraft to save 22 of the members, but 15 remained and began to prepare in case they needed to stay the winter. Because the ship couldn't be heated, the remaining crew members would return to the ship every few days to chip away some of the ice, but also to grab essential items from the ship. On November 24th, there was a powerful storm, and once it had cleared, the Beichimo was gone. The remaining crew assumed that it had sunk, but this is really where our mystery gets started. An Inuk hunter spotted the ship around 72 miles from the camp the remaining crew members had set up, and somehow they ended up locating it, removing the rest of the valuables, and then abandoning it for the last time because it was believed that this ship wouldn't last the rest of the winter. After the rest of the crew was finally rescued, the ship ended up being spotted around 480 miles from its previous sighting. For 40 years after, the Beichimo was frequently spotted floating in different locations, sometimes even providing people with shelter during storms, but was never once captured. In 2006, the Alaskan government began to work on a project to find the Beichimo, but since the most previous sighting, she has never been located again. While the ship is now presumed sunken, it would have been the longest sailing ghost ship of all time. Ships rarely survive for nearly as long while being unmanned, especially in the crushing icy waters. We still haven't found the wreck of this ship either, so perhaps it is still out there floating somewhere. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Devil's Sea. The Devil's Sea is like the Bermuda Triangle of the Pacific, as it lies in a region just south of Tokyo. This area is often thought as some sort of a paranormal area because of the consistent horrible happenings that occur in it. This area is one of the 12 vile vortices in the world, with the Bermuda Triangle being the most famous one. Above the Devil's Sea, planes are known to seemingly just drop out of the sky like something is reaching up and grabbing them. Methane deposits cause large explosions in the area, and during World War II, this area was the site of over 20 missing submarines. There have also been numerous ships, some twice the size of the Titanic, who have gone missing without a trace after sailing through the Devil's Sea. This is all to say that while we don't really know what lurks in this area, it's probably safest to just stay the heck away from it. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Cassie Nicole. The Cassie Nicole was a boat that set sail from Richmond Hill, Georgia on April 10th, 1990 with 4 people people on board. During the second day aboard, one of the passengers realized that the boat was suddenly taking on water, and at this same time the pumps and radio were not working, which left them with little to no options. The crew decided it was time to board a life raft and abandon ship. After a day of floating on this life raft, one of the passengers named Nathan saw the ship's hatch cover floating by them and thought that it might be able to support him better. Once he hopped onto the cover, he ended up losing sight of the other 3 crew members. Later in the day, he saw a freighter go by multiple times, and he was hoping that it had picked up the 3 crew members he had lost contact with. After 3 days of floating at sea, Nathan was finally rescued, but he received the news that the other crew members hadn't been found. Months went by with no sign of the others until a few months later, when Nathan's sister, as well as the owner of the boat, began receiving strange phone calls from someone who was speaking in Spanish. The person on the other line said their name as well as the names of the missing people, and in the final phone call the stranger said, in English, "I'm bringing them home," but there has still never been a sign of them. The family of the disappeared men believe that they may be alive somewhere but are being held in a foreign country, but why? And why would someone say that they were bringing them home only to not do that? In our number 2 spot today, we have the Loneliest Whale. This whale has been nicknamed the loneliest whale in the world, but the truth is, we don't really know if that's true because we've never actually seen it. This whale, which we don't know if it's a male or a female, or what whale species it belongs to, sings its song like no other whale does. The whale was first heard in 1989 on a hydrophone, and while the calls were most similar to that of a blue whale, there was one striking difference, and that was the frequency of the calls. This whale calls at 52 Hz, with regular blue whales calling between 10 and 40 Hz. Even fin whales are usually heard at 20 Hz, so it's just left everyone stumped as to what could be going on here. A researcher named Bill Watkins dedicated his life to trying to reveal what exactly is going on here, and while he passed away in 2004, he found that this whale was not only unusual, but totally unique. The biggest challenge is the fact that we cannot locate this whale. Their calls can be heard for hundreds of miles, and trying to find one single whale in the vastness of the ocean is next to impossible. Many people have suggested that perhaps the whale is deaf, and this is what has led to its unique song, but of course, without the whale, how could we possibly know for sure? In our number 1 spot today, we have the French sailors. Yves Emmanuel Payne and Laurent Hernas were French sailors who were hired to sail a boat to its new owners. Their trip would see them departing from Annapolis, Maryland and heading to Guadalupe, but when they never arrived at their destination, searches quickly began. Unlike many of the other stories similar to this one, there were actually sightings of this ship, most of them occurring along the intercoastal waterway, which was far off from the course the ship was intended to take. Along with these sightings came the frightening news that the witnesses claimed to see a third man on the boat, which made people begin to believe that it had been hijacked, which wouldn't have been all that surprising considering the state of the art vessel they were on. Despite these sightings, the boat was never found, and neither were the men. To add even more strange occurrences to this story, however, around 2 months after the disappearance, a police officer in South Carolina pulled over a speeding car. After a sort of strange encounter with those in the vehicle, it was later discovered that 2 of the 3 men in the car were the missing Yves Emmanuel and Laurent, but at this point, they of course had already been released. What exactly happened here has never been fully discovered, despite this all happening in 1991. Were the sailors kidnapped? Were they part of an elaborate plan to steal the ship, despite their loved ones saying that they would never do such a thing? It all remains a mystery.
Starting us off in the number 10 spot is the USS Saratoga. Built in the late 1920s, this ship fought its fair share of World War II battles, but after 20 years of service, it finally met its demise during nuclear weapon testing at Bikini Atoll. The ship was able to hold up to the first round of firing, but the second test, named Test Baker, an underwater blast which was detonated, and the force of the explosion lifted the vessel out of the water before it crashed down into the sea, where it remains to this day. Ever since, the submerged wreck has become a scuba diving destination, as it's not terribly deep beneath the surface, but even so, it is not for the faint of heart. Some divers that have visited claim to feel an evil presence when they're near the ship, and some even claim to have been grabbed by an unseen force while they were trying to make it back up to the surface. So, on the off chance if you do decide to take a dive, don't say I didn't warn you. Coming in at number 9. the oldest recorded wreckage. When it comes to cursed and terrifying things, usually the older it is, the creepier. And I have to say that this ship is no exception. So the world's oldest known shipwreck has been discovered sitting at the bottom of the Black Sea, and it's estimated that the ship has been in the same spot for roughly 2,400 years, which is wild. Now, I think that the creepiest part of all of this is that we have no real backstory about how this ship ended up here, what happened in its final moments before it sank to the bottom of the ocean, or how many people went down with it. So while we may never know exactly what went down all those years ago, one thing we do know is that there is a dark and sinister energy surrounding the ship that should not be messed with. You never know what kind of ancient curse could accidentally be uncovered if you aren't careful. Coming in at our number 8 spot, the SS Valencia. On January 22nd, 1906, the Valencia was en route from San Francisco to Seattle when suddenly it snagged on a submerged reef on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. Tragically, many of the rescuers were thwarted by the jagged, uncharted rocks and fierce storm, and many lifeboats capsized in the rolling waters. So for the next 36 hours, passengers clung to the deck while rescuers attempted to get them to safety, until a giant wave swept 99 out of the 137 passengers out to sea in a disastrous shock. Ever since the tragic incident, reports of strange occurrences, including ghostly apparitions and eerie sounds, have been linked to the cursed shipwreck. But most disturbing are the claims from sailors on the west coast of Vancouver Island who've reported seeing a phantom ship floundering in the waves. And it's said that while its terrified passengers and crew appear still holding on for dear life, screaming out for help, they are just waiting for anyone to pass by so they can drag you down with them. Next up in our number 7 spot, the Titanic. I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that there isn't a more famous shipwreck than the Titanic. But just because we all know about it doesn't make it any safer to visit, as has been made abundantly clear the last few days. Plus, whether you believe in ghosts or not, when nearly 1,500 people lose their lives, it should be no surprise that it's considered an incredibly cursed location. According to those who have visited the surface since the fateful day, strange sights such as odd glowing orbs of light can be seen floating around at night, and many believe they are actually the spirits of those who died at sea. But that's not all. Deep sea vessels that have explored the area further report receiving eerie, faint SOS calls that fade in and out and seem to have no traceable source. Could they be the ghosts of the fallen calling out for help? Many believe so. However, the most terrifying curse of all has to do with an old legend that says if you aren't careful, the lonely ghosts in the sea may just pull you overboard to live the rest of eternity with them. Coming in at number 6, the SS Andrea Doria. Sometimes referred to as the Mount Everest of scuba diving due to its location 180 feet under the waves, this ship became famous after a terrifying accident that led to her sinking almost 70 years ago. The fateful day was July 25th, 1956, and the Andrea Doria, a luxury transatlantic ocean liner, was about to reach the coast of Nantucket when it accidentally collided with an incoming ship. Upon impact, the ship began to tilt severely, and many lifeboats were left unusable. However, thankfully, many of its passengers were rescued and brought to safety, but not all of them. The incident made major headlines at the time, mostly as a success story, but to this day there are still many who claim the shipwreck is cursed by the 47 passengers who never made it out alive. Those that have passed by report feeling the sensation of being touched or yanked by an unseen entity, and some sailors even claim to have seen full-on apparitions of the dead floating around the area. Next up at number 5, St. Peter. It was in October of 1898 when the vessel of St. Peter was attacked by a storm on Lake Ontario while delivering coal from Oswego to Toledo. The crew attempted to brave the storm for 12 hours in the face of 20-foot waves, but sadly they were no match for the treacherous conditions, and by the time rescuers arrived, all 7 crew members along with the captain's wife had drowned at sea. Tragically, the only person left standing was the captain himself. Today it is said that the spirits of the drowned sailors haunt the area area, terrifying anyone who passes nearby. But it's the ghost of the captain's wife Martha who you really want to make sure you stay away from, as it's said that one look into her eyes will curse you for the rest of eternity. Coming in at number 4, the Flying Dutchman. So before I get into this next one, I have to be honest and say that this is more of a legend than an actual confirmed shipwreck, but it's terrifying nonetheless, and who's to say it can't be real? First noted in the late 18th century, the first accounts of the legend of the Flying Dutchman describe the apparition in connection with the crew of a Dutch ship lost off the Cape of Good Hope in a storm, perhaps as punishment for some kind of horrible crime. But as time went on, sightings continued. King George V described seeing a ship glowing with a strange red light off the coast of Australia in 1881. Then in March of 1939, about a dozen people claimed to see the vessel off the coast of South Africa. And during World War II, German Admiral Karl Donitz said that members of the crew of one of his U-boats had seen the Dutchman while patrolling off Cape Town. But what exactly were the terrifying sightings, you ask? Well, some reports mention a crew of skeletons dancing in the rigging, while others warn that the ship has the ability to lure other vessels into the rocks, as supposedly the captain is jealous of other ships who might pass the Cape, and will do everything in his power to prevent them by ensuring their death in a storm. Coming in at number 3, RMS Ran. Reportedly one of the most haunted wrecks in history, the tales about the RMS Ran are about as disturbing as you can imagine. In October of 1867, while traveling through the Caribbean, the captain saw an unexpected storm ahead. Now initially, he was not concerned, as it was well past hurricane season, and he even accepted passengers from another smaller ship to be transferred, as the Ran was regarded as unsinkable. But of course, the story doesn't stop there. The skies became gray and the storm hit the ship, but it wasn't until the clouds cleared that the captain realized how wrong he had been. He was in the eye of the hurricane. In an effort to keep the now hysterical passengers safe, he ordered they be tied to their bunks. But as it turns out, he couldn't have made a worse decision. Soon a giant wave came crashing over the ship, sending it flying for the rocks and allowing seawater to rush in and fill the hot boiler room. The result was a massive explosion that ripped the ship in two. And since nearly all the passengers were tied down, the incident cost an estimated 250 people their lives. These days, those that have visited the area complain of frightening moans and groans coming from the wreck, and some divers claim that they've been grabbed by something only to turn around and there be nothing near them in sight. Coming in at number 2, the SS Emperor. The SS Emperor was the largest ever Canadian-built ship at the time of her launching in 1910. But from the time of her launch, the Emperor suffered from bad luck, which remained the case until its eventual sinking in 1947. On its last day, the Emperor left Thunder Bay with a cargo of iron ore, and the captain gave control of the ship to his first mate, who had overseen loading the ship earlier that day. Now some say it was fatigue of being overworked, while others claim there was some kind evil spirit afoot already, but the ship ran aground at around 4 in the morning and sank within 30 minutes, killing 12 people, including the captain and the first mate. Ever since, divers claim to have seen evil spirits like the ghosts of the Emperor's perished crew members still at work. Some have even reported hearing the voices chant "Die, die, die" as they chase you back to the surface. And last up in our number 1 spot, the Alkimos. Once a Greek-owned merchant ship that became stranded along the Western Australian coast, the Alkimos wreck has long been revered as a spooky and even cursed location. Reports include apparitions of a small dog in the engine room, footsteps on ladders when no one's there, a human figure in rubber boots, nicknamed Harry, and Morse key clatters in the unoccupied radio room. But those are a far cry from the real dangers it holds. One curse has to do with the legend that the welders were sealed between the hulls of the ship when it was still under construction, and that their angry, vengeful spirits haunt the wreck seeking out revenge. But the scariest spirit is the mysterious crew member who killed a radio operator on board before taking his own life. It's said his full apparition can be seen wandering around the wreck, and legend has it that anyone who gets too close to the ship will be possessed by his evil spirit and forced to commit the same crime that sent him to his death. So, unless you have an exorcist on speed dial, then this is probably not the place for you.
Starting off this countdown, we have the giant cannibal shark. Sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. Honestly, maybe it is. So in 2003, scientists tagged a 9-foot-long great white shark. They did this in order to study the temperature changes in the ocean. Here's the thing. Several months later, the tag washed up on shore. The shark, nowhere to be seen. They checked the information on the tag, and that's when they were shocked. About 4 months after the tag was put on the shark, it dove to around 1,900 feet. They believe that's because the shark was attacked and eaten by something. But what creature in the ocean is going around eating a 9-foot-long great white shark? They still don't know. It could be a massive sea creature that we haven't found yet. Or they think it might be an even bigger shark, making it a massive cannibal shark. If you're not afraid of the ocean yet, then this for sure has done it for you. Coming in at number 9, we have the lost city of Atlantis. There's a city that lies sunken underwater just off the coast of the Japanese island Yonaguni, making it Japan's very own Atlantis. Many people believe that the city is around 5,000 years old. There are complete pyramids, ruins of a castle, structures etched with faces, and rock sculptures that look like animals all underwater. It's theorized that a terrible earthquake caused the city to be engulfed by water. But to this day, we don't know the true origins of this mysterious underwater city. Conspiracy theorists believe that the CIA destroyed this island in order to expand America's economic zone. Unless we travel back in time, there's no way to find out more about the city and what happened to it. Coming in at number 8, we have Carroll A. Deering, aka the ghost ship of the Outer Banks. So on January 31st, 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was found abandoned off of Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. The crew was nowhere to be found. On top of that, tons of stuff was missing from the ship, including the crew's personal belongings, life rafts, logbooks, and navigational equipment. To this day, no one knows what happened to the crew aboard the ship. But of course, we got some theories. Theory 1 is that a mutiny occurred. Theory 2 is that they were ransacked by pirates. Theory 3 is that they were taking part in rum running. People stole the ship to use for the rum running. And when they were done, they just abandoned the ship and left it there. But like I said before, we don't know for sure. In our 7th spot, we have the electronic fog. Okay, this one is pretty weird, not gonna lie. So on December 4th, 1970, a man named Rob McGregor was flying over the Bermuda Triangle when he was met by this weird tunnel-shaped vortex. He entered it, and apparently his wings sounded like they were scraping along metal. All of the electronic and magnetic navigational instruments malfunctioned. When he looked up, all he saw was a dull gray fog. Also, there were strange clouds forming behind the airplane. They were only in the clouds for a couple of minutes, but claimed that they traveled for 40 minutes. When they got out of the fog, they were over Miami Beach, a flight that would have taken 75 minutes. He believes that this weird fog is what has caused other planes and boats and passengers to disappear in the Bermuda Triangle. So what is this weird electronic fog that he encountered while over the ocean? That's something I want to know. In our 6th spot today, we have the time travel. Legend goes that one day 3 ships were traveling through the Bermuda Triangle. Everything was going fine until they encountered a mysterious fog. When they emerged through the other end of the fog, there were only 2 ships. The other ship was way ahead of them. The crew aboard the ship claimed that the fog transported them back in time several years. There, they saw a bunch of different boats and passengers also sailing. Then they approached the same fog and they got transported back to the current day. Isn't that weird? Was this the same fog the pilot encountered? Like, what is going on in the ocean? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the disappearance of Keith Davis. Now, this case is certainly going to keep you up at night, so just a little warning. So in 2015, Keith Davis, a fisheries observer, headed out to sea with his crew. His job was to monitor all the catches and collect data on it. But about a month later, Keith disappeared off the ship in the middle of the day, in broad daylight. He has never been found. On top of that, the weather that day was calm, and he was an experienced observer, so it's not like he just fell overboard by accident. So what happened to him? Well, theory goes that he knew too much, so someone got rid of him. When police searched his email, they found photographic evidence of illegal things happening on board these ships, like they were allegedly smuggling people. He was also keeping track of a number of rule violations. Not only that, a year before his disappearance, Keith sent a mysterious email to his friends. In the email was a video of 4 men being shot to death while holding onto debris in the ocean. So theory goes that Keith was killed for knowing way too much. But still, to this day, we don't know exactly what happened to him. Coming in at number 4, we have the Ellen Austin. In 1880, a ship named the Ellen Austin set sail to New York from Liverpool. During their travels, the crew spotted a ship floating near the Bermuda Triangle. They approached it and found that nothing was wrong with the ship, but all the crew on board were missing. So they decided to put some of their own crew members on board this mysterious ship and have it come with them. But during the trip, the 2 ships got separated. They were separated for a couple of days before the Ellen Austin spotted the ship once again. However, all their crew on board vanished. There was no trace of them. Now, the story goes on saying that they placed another set of crew members aboard the ship, and once again, the exact same thing happened to those men. They disappeared off the ship without a trace. But that account hasn't been confirmed. Either way, this mystery gave birth to an urban legend. Basically, a cursed ghost ship lurks the waters near the Bermuda Triangle. Those who hop on board will mysteriously disappear without a trace. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Witchcraft. This is the name of a boat that set sail on December 22nd, 1967. On board was the captain, Dan Burrack, and his friend, Patrick Horgan. The 2 headed off to get a good look at Miami's Christmas lights. However, after traveling just 1 mile out, they contacted the Coast Guard, saying that the boat had hit something, but there was no damage. Dan seemed to be calm on the call to the Coast Guard and said they just needed a tow to the shore. So they figured that the boat's propeller was just damaged or something like that. The Coast Guard immediately went out, but when he arrived at the spot the boat was said to be, no one was there. It took him only 19 minutes to get there, yet the boat was already gone. Here's where it gets super weird. This boat was virtually unsinkable. Not only did they have life jackets and lifeboats on board, but the boat had a special flotation device installed in it. This made it basically unsinkable. So even if the boat started filling with water, part of it would still be sticking out of the water, so the Coast Guard would be able to see it. And also, they had flare guns on board with them, so if something serious started to happen, they could have set those off. They didn't. The boat and the 2 friends on board just disappeared without a trace, and to this day have never been found.
Starting off this countdown, we had the HMS Sea Serpent. In August of 1848, the crew on the HMS Daedalus was sailing in the South Atlantic when they spotted this terrifying creature. According to the ship's captain and several members of the crew, they claimed that the monster was 60 feet in length, with 4 feet of his head raising out of the water. This massive sea beast lurked around the ship for 20 minutes before taking off. To this day, we don't know what it is that they saw. They described it as being a long snake with a dragon's head. Pretty weird and creepy, right? Well, they aren't the only ones who witnessed this too. It was spotted a second time by the American brig Daphne, and in fact, crew on board even shot at it. Scientists claim that maybe they just saw a whale, but come on, a bunch of experienced sailors would know the difference between a whale and something that's not a whale. And at number 9 today, we have the Mary Celeste, and if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. To this day, the mysterious case of the Mary Celeste is considered one of the creepiest cases in nautical history. Basically, in 1872, the Mary Celeste was found abandoned in the middle of choppy waters. The crew was nowhere to be found. All the cargo on board remained untouched. Now, the lifeboats were missing, which makes people believe that the crew tried to get off the ship and flee. But why would they just abandon their ship like that? Well, we got a number of theories. 1, a sea monster got them. 2, a pirate takeover occurred. 3, they were abducted by aliens, or 4, they consumed bad food and they all went mad. I know, it seems wild. To make matters weirder though, the crew and lifeboats were never found. No one knows what happened aboard that ship. In our 8th spot, we have the Baltic Sea anomaly. In 2011, a group of divers went out looking for treasure in the Baltic Sea, and they came across something weird.
It was a 70-meter long weird object laying 300 feet below sea level. This thing has since been named the Baltic Sea Anomaly, and no one knows what the heck it is. It's just this massive steel-looking structure shaped like a disc with some weird patterns on it. Gets weirder when the divers claim their equipment randomly stopped working when they got closer to the object. There was a massive electrical interference there. So what is this thing? Honestly, we don't know. But some people think it's a glacial deposit left from thawing glaciers. Or it's part of a UFO spacecraft, from one extreme to another. Could be either or, who knows. In our 7th spot, we have the 3 men. In 2007, 3 Australian men headed out on an expedition together. 3 days later, their ship was found drifting by itself in the middle of the ocean. The men were nowhere to be found. That's not all. On the ship, they found knives all over the cabin floor, as if there had been a fight and people were scrambling for weapons. What happened to these men still remains a mystery to this day. But of course, we got the theories. One is that they got into a devastating fight and they all ended up dying. Or 2, their propeller became snarled in a fishing line. One dude went to go free the line but then fell into the ocean. The second dude tried to save him and then fell in as well, and then so on with the third guy, or who even knows. Okay, we don't know for sure, that's just a theory. The only thing we do know is that this case is pretty creepy. Moving on to number 6, we have the Kraken. So it may just be that the Kraken is real, but it's not what we think it is. In fact, the legend of the Kraken was thought to have been born after a number of sailors spotted giant squids while sailing. So the Kraken might actually just be giant squids. In 1870, a giant squid washed up in New Zealand. Legend goes that it was as tall as the top of a ship's main mast, and it could easily take over a ship by wrapping its tentacles around the hull and crushing it. Is this true? Who knows? But no one believed that giant squids were real until around 2005. That's when scientists caught a photo of one. Then in 2013 they got a video of one. Now they believe there are millions of giant squids out there. The mystery here is, what beast did the sailors encounter in 1870? Was it a ginormous squid, or was it a kraken, or is a squid a kraken? Who even knows, okay? There's just so many questions out there that we need answers to. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the cursed shipwreck. Back in the early 2000s, a natural gas company was laying pipeline in the ocean when they came across a shipwreck. Nowadays, this shipwreck is considered cursed or haunted. Let me explain why. So after the shipwreck was discovered, a team was sent down there to check it out. But everything that could go wrong did. First, the exploration sub malfunctioned right as it was getting ready to explore the wreck. Then the Navy sent a research sub down there and it literally self-destructed upon entering the water. Then over the course of a couple of years, other attempts have been made to explore the ship, but those have gone wrong as well. None have been successful. So now it's believed that this ship is cursed and doesn't want anyone entering it. In our 4th spot, we have the disappearing submarines. In 1968, 4 different submarines all mysteriously went missing. As a result, people believe that this can no way just be a coincidence. Something was out there sinking these subs. The subs were the USS Scorpion, the Soviet submarine K-129, a French submarine Minerve, and the INS Dakar. In fact, the French sub and the INS Dakar disappeared only 4 days apart. The French submarine has still never been found. What's weird is that it disappeared only an hour away from its port, so you think they'd be able to track it down, but nope. So what are the odds that 4 massive submarines go missing the exact same year? What could have caused this? We'll probably never know. In our 3rd spot, we have Sylvester Butler Jr. Apparently a number of people mysteriously vanish off of cruise ships each year. Most of them have never been found. Today, let's look at the weird case of Sylvester Butler Jr. In May of 2017, Sylvester boarded a cruise ship headed to the Pacific Islands. While on board though, the crew noticed he was acting weird. He kept to himself, barely talked to anyone else, and housekeeping claimed that he never unpacked his bags. The only charge on his bill was the occasional soft drink he would order to his room. Also, every time the cruise made a stop, he never left the ship. Then somewhere between Fiji and the final port Sydney, crew noticed that he was missing. No one knows what happened to him. and the ship's CCTV footage revealed nothing. It's sad, but theory goes that Butler jumped off the ship and took his own life. Apparently he suffered from a chronic genetic kidney disease, so maybe he wanted to end his suffering, but we don't know for sure. On top of that, I believe that his body was never found. Coming in our second spot today, we have the Stronsay Beast. The Stronsay Beast is the name given to a massive carcass that washed ashore on Stronsay Island on September of 1808. At first, people thought it was just the body of a shark, but this creature had paws instead of fins. So then people were hella confused. Not only that, but it was 55 feet long. But part of its tail was missing, so clearly this thing was even bigger than that. This beast was described as follows, and I quote, "Its flesh was described as being like coarse, ill-colored beef, entirely covered with fat and tallow, and without the least resemblance or affinity to fish. The skin, which was gray-colored and had an elastic texture, was said to be about 2 inches thick in parts." End quote. Not only that, but its bristles glowed in the dark when wet, and the contents in its stomach were red. So what is this beast? The Natural History Society of Edinburgh believes that it is a sea serpent of some sorts. Maybe the Loch Ness Monster or its long-lost brother, who knows. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Orang Medan. So this next mystery is pretty freaking creepy, I'm not gonna lie. It's gonna keep you up at night. So in 1947, 2 American ships received a distress call from the ship the Orang Medan. The SOS call was from a crew member that stated everyone on board the ship had died. Then all of a sudden, his SOS ended with his last message being, "I die." When the ships arrived, they found the ship completely unharmed. The entire crew, including a dog on board, had died. Everyone had a terrified look plastered on their face. No one knows what happened to the ship. Theory goes, though, that maybe they were exposed to some dangerous gas and died. That seems to be the most common theory out there.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Mornak Ship Graveyard in Uzbekistan. This ship graveyard showcases the destructive power that man can have on his environment. This area used to be lush with life, and it was home to the Aral Sea. This was a massive salt lake that housed one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. It was teeming with life not just below the surface, but above it as well. There were thousands of people that called the borders of this sea home. It was where people would fish and live. An entire industry was built around this lake, but when the government wanted to use the waters to expand the agriculture influence in the area, they started to funnel water out of the lake through the man-made rivers, and slowly but surely they shrank down the sea and the salt levels skyrocketed. It was eventually too salty for anything to live in the lake. Eventually everything died off, and everyone who used to live around there had to find other means of survival. Now the whole area is a desert that houses the rusted remains of ships that once traveled the Aral Sea. Coming in at number 9, we have Miss World Discoverer Solomon Island. This is the worst nightmare for every single retired person who loves to spend their time going on cruises. In the 70s, the Miss World Discoverer was working as a cruise ship, and while swooping by the Solomon Island, the captain made a huge mistake. He came too close to the island shore and hit a massive rock which pierced through the hull of the ship. So what happened to the 2,000 people that were on board the ship? Well, they were all eaten by sharks, and now the place is called the Shark Graveyard. I'm just kidding, that didn't actually happen at all. Actually, not a single person died. Everyone on board managed to make it to the lifeboats, they made it to the shore of the island, and then the island had an operating ferry for tourists to visit. This was all very convenient. So it took a few trips, but they were all able to make it home safely. Coming in at number 8, we have the Mediterranean Sky in Greece. Let's go over to a massive cruise liner that was built all the way back in the 50s. I'm not sure how long a boat is good for, but it would weird me out knowing that you're setting sail on something that is older than my parents. I think when I'm putting my faith in something that's supposed to take me across the ocean, I want to make sure that the blueprints have the latest updates. But even though this ship had a long career, it never saw any problems. The reason that it became a wreck was actually due to lack of use. It was sitting in a Greek harbor for over 2 years, and then one day the ship started to take on water. I don't know if you guys know this about boats, but that is very bad. Well, the owners of the boat didn't have the means to fix it, but they also didn't want to lose it to the murky depths of Davy Jones' locker. So they managed to get the boat to some shallow waters, and they got it stuck on land. It stayed there for a time until the boat broke open, and then it was laid there as a wreck. It's now a tourist attraction. I'm kind of realizing that going to see a giant shipwreck is like going to check out a big piece of garbage, but I still want to go for some reason. Coming in at number 7, we have the Bessie White from Fire Island, New York. That sounds like the most brutal place to be shipwrecked. Fire Island? It sounds like there would be an active volcano there and a bunch of locals there that want to tie you up and take you to the mouth of the volcano so they can sacrifice you. But it turns out it's actually a pretty peaceful place. The Bessie White was an old schooner that was mainly used to haul coal throughout America. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. The ship crashed off the coast of the island in the 20s, and a pretty penny worth of coal was lost to the world, and I bet a bunch of people were fired that day. You don't make a 6-figure mistake and then just walk into work the next day like nothing happened. For a long time, the boat was gone to the world, but the changing shorelines revealed where it was left. You can go visit the boat whenever you want, but you just have to make it to Fire Island, so that might be a pass for me. Next on the list, we have the SS Mahale on Fraser Island, Australia. This ship was originally a Navy ship, but it came in contact with a very intense cyclone, and now it sits on the shore of Fraser Island. The metal skeleton sits on the beach and looks just as dangerous as it is. Some people think that it would be a good idea to climb and enter the wreckage, and many of them learn quickly that there's nothing in there but pain. Many people have hurt themselves in the wreckage of the ship trying to get too close for photo ops or the perfect selfie. And it doesn't help that Fraser Island is already known for being dangerous from the aggressive wildlife that lives on the island. So if you go there for a visit, try not to draw blood while you explore. You don't want a pack of dingoes to be the last thing you see. Next on the list is the USTA Liberty in Bali, Indonesia. Now we're finally getting to a battleship. The USTA was smashed in the hull by a Japanese torpedo in 1942 just off the coast of Bali. It was extremely close to the shore, only 30 meters away, so most of the men on board were able to abandon ship and swim to the shore. And even though the ship has a dark past, it is now a prime time location for snorkeling and freediving. The wreck is only 9 meters underwater, so you can swim right out to it and dive down to find a wide array of sea life living on it. That's not a bad way to spend your afternoon, just have to forget that it's down there because of World War II. Coming in at number 4, we have the AA Airfield. At first glance, this ship looks like it was set up for an apocalypse movie, but you will quickly learn that it's actually just one of the most beautiful wrecks ever. It's just off the coast of Australia, and even though the ship is a giant hunk of dead metal, life has chosen it as a spot to create. There are trees growing out through the hull of this dead ship. They reach out through the top of the wreckage. Something that used to be a giant hunk of garbage has now become a marine and vegetation sanctuary. Coming in next on the list, we have the SS Thistlegrom in the Red Sea, Egypt. One of the most famous wrecks in the world. The SS Thistlegrom was doing its duty in World War II when it was shot down and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. But being a casualty of war was not what makes this ship so interesting. It's everything that was on board. Taking a dive down to this wreck is like stepping into a time machine. Old rifles, motorcycles, and army supplies are all stuffed away inside this wreckage. Some people say that salvaging some of the goods could be worth thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the wreck is now a protected reef, so there's no way you can bring that stuff back to the surface without breaking the law. It's all looking and no touching. We have the MV Panagotis in Zakynthos Island, Greece. I can't believe it took us this long, but we finally made it to a pirate shipwreck. It's not an old school pirate shipwreck that has black sails and a bunch of scurvy-ridden hooligans who are constantly drunk on rum. No, this pirate ship was operating back in the 80s. It would come to a place known as Smuggler's Cove. This is considered the most beautiful beach in all of Greece. The waters are crystal clear, and the only way you can get there is by boat unless you can swim like Aquaman. This is why it was such a hot spot for smugglers to bring goods in and out of Greece. Well, one day the captain of the Panagotis was feeling a little bit bold and he brought the ship in way too close and it hit land. The crew did what they could to try and get the boat loose, but there was nothing they could do. It now sits on the shore of the beach as an added tourist attraction. And number 1 on the list is the SS Yonglanga, Queensland, Australia. Alright, grab your scuba gear because you're going to need to head underwater for this next wreck. If you want to visit this one, you're going to need your PADI certification because there is no way you're going to get face to face with this wreck unless you got a scuba tank or some serious freediving lungs. When the Yolanga went down, it was not a pretty sight. It was actually a tragedy and a very scary one at that. A cyclone came through when the boat was out at sea, and even though they had a skilled crew, nothing could handle the massive swells that were thrown at them. The ship was ripped down underwater and 122 people died in the wreck. On the bright side, the wreck is now teeming with life. In the 109 years that the ship has been sitting at the bottom of the ocean, it has collected a ton of coral and marine life that call it home. This place is a scuba paradise. You can see everything from octopuses, manta rays, sea turtles, to tiger sharks, not to mention the whole wreck is covered head to toe in coral. Some say it is the most beautiful sunken ship in the world.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Mont Blanc and Emo. Halifax is a port city that is located here in Canada in the province of Nova Scotia. Halifax was a super important place during the First World War as it acted as a hotspot for ships that were carrying supplies, troops, ammunition, war stuff. On December 6th, 1917, a Norwegian ship called Emo left Halifax and it ended up colliding with a French ship called the Mont Blanc. This is already disastrous, but it was made significantly worse by the fact that the Mont Blanc held explosives. Because of the collision, the Mont Blanc was pushed towards the shore and ended up setting the harborfront ablaze. Just a few minutes later, the entire ship exploded with a blast so strong that windows 50 miles away were shattered. Unfortunately, there were many people at the waterfront when the explosion happened, which led to 1,800 people dying in this accident. 9,000 people were injured, and it is said that 1,600 homes were destroyed in the blast. The force of this blast really cannot be understated. It was so powerful that it caused a tidal wave and violent tremors, which were able to uproot trees from out of the ground. They damaged railroad tracks, and they destroyed numerous buildings whose debris was scattered for hundreds of yards. In the end, this is what made this explosion one of the most violent non-nuclear explosions in history, and what makes it likely the world's largest accidental man-made explosion. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Toya Maru. This ship was a Japanese train ferry that was out to sea in between the islands of Hokkaido and Honshu in 1954 when it was struck by Typhoon Marie. The captain tried to ride it out and attempted to anchor the ship in place, but the winds were so strong that it broke free. Seawater began pouring into the engine compartment, which then caused the steam engine to quit running, and the ferry was then completely uncontrollable. The captain continued to try whatever he could to get the ship to safety, and he even tried to beach the ship, but unfortunately the waves were just too powerful. After being tossed around in the waves and battered by the water, and after all the rain and strong winds, the ship ended up capsizing and sinking. In the end, 1,163 people lost their lives in this disaster, including 35 American soldiers who were members of the US Army's 1st Cavalry Division Artillery. The Toya Maru wasn't the only ship sunk in this storm, as Typhoon Marie also sank 4 other ferries as well. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Taiping steamer. In 1949, the Taiping steamer was out to sea and was seriously overloaded with 1,000 war refugees on board. This ship was sailing from Shanghai, China to Keelung, Taiwan when it collided with a cargo vessel called the Qianyuan. At the time of this accident, the Taiping was fleeing the Chinese Civil War, which is why it was so overcrowded when it only should have been holding a maximum of 580 passengers. This kind of overcrowding did not help with the sinking of the ship and sadly only sped up the process. It is also said that the ship was steaming without lights even though it was after curfew, which of course likely didn't help to avoid this very tragic situation. Sadly, there were 1,500 people who lost their lives in this collision. In our number 7 spot today, we have the SS Principe Umberto. This ship was built in 1909 as an Italian passenger ship, but in the times during the First World War, it ended up being converted into an armed merchant cruiser. On June 8, 1916, this ship was transporting troops on the Adriatic Sea. These troops were part of the 55th Infantry Regiment and were on their way back from Albania to Italy. Although the ship was accompanied by others, it still ended up being struck by an Austro-Hungarian U-5 submarine that had launched a torpedo attack. This ship ended up sinking just minutes later, and it is said that this disaster took the lives of 1,926 men, making it the worst naval disaster of the First World War in terms of lives lost. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Yamato. This ship was a Japanese battleship that served in the Second World War. She was the lead ship of her class of battleships, and she was one of the 2 of the heaviest and most powerfully armed battleships ever constructed. On April 7, 1945, the ship was about 300 kilometers south of the Japanese island of Kyushu when it was confronted by a US carrier-based aircraft. This aircraft bombed the ship, which led to it capsizing. This then caused the ammunition on board to explode, which tore the ship in 2. After a total of 13 torpedo hits and 8 hits, the ship completely sunk. The ship was accompanied by a light cruiser and 4 other destroyers, which were all sunk in this event as well. This sadly led to thousands of deaths, as most of the crew lost their lives in this battle. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Joseph Stalin. The Joseph Stalin was of course a Soviet passenger ship that was converted to carry troops during the Second World War. This ship was very important to Soviet forces as it was used in 1941 in the evacuation of Tallinn and was later used to evacuate the Soviet naval base in Hanko, Finland. Just after this evacuation on December 3rd, 1941, the ship ended up entering the Gulf of Finland where it encountered 3 German mines. This led to the crew scrambling around to try and fix up the damage that the mines had caused. While they were distracted by this, Finnish forces ended up spotting the ship and saw an opportunity to strike. This led to the ammunition that was on board the Soviet ship to detonate, which ended up taking the lives of 3,849 out of the 5,589 who were on board. Those who didn't lose their lives in this incident ended up being captured and held as prisoners of war by the German forces. In our number 4 spot today, we have the SS Cap Arcona. This ship was a German luxury ocean liner that was launched in 1927. But by the time the mid-1940s rolled around, however, like many other ships on this list, this one was put to use to help in the country's war efforts. This time, this ship was converted into a prison ship. In April of 1945, with the advance of the British Army, prisoners being held at concentration camps were being loaded onto ships, and the Cap Arcona was one of them. On May 3rd, 1945, with more than 6,000 people on board, the ship was attacked by the British Air Force. The prisoners on board were being held below deck at the time, and the ship was not marked with any sort of red cross, so unfortunately those in the British Air Force did not realize that the ship was filled with prisoners at the time. The ship capsized but did not sink entirely, but still this wreck caused somewhere around 5,000 deaths. In our number 3 spot today, we have the HMS Armenia. This was a Soviet passenger ship that was first launched in November of 1928, and she had a maximum capacity of 980 passengers. During the Second World War, this ship was put to use by transporting troops, and from October 9th, 1941, the ship was used to evacuate soldiers, workers, and materials from Odessa. In November of 1941, there was the invasion of German troops that led to an extreme rush to evacuate the hospitals in the city of Sevastopol, and the Armenia was repurposed again into a hospital ship. This led to about 4,000 wounded people and medical personnel from 11 different hospitals being loaded onto the ship to set sail towards Yalta. Once there, another 1,000 passengers were loaded onto the ship in a rush, none of which were officially recorded. On November 7th, the ship was attacked by a German Heinkel HE-111, and in just 4 minutes the ship sadly sank, taking the lives of almost everyone on board. Just 8 people survived the entire ordeal. In German records, there is no mention that the Armenia was a hospital ship, so it's unclear if they omitted that tale or if they mistakenly believed that it was a troop carrier. Either way, it is absolutely devastating. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Arctic. This ship made its maiden transatlantic voyage in 1850, and it was best known for its speed. This ship was able to cross the Atlantic in just 9 days. On September 27, 1854, the ship was sailing from Liverpool to New York City when it collided with a French steamship called the Vesta. This occurred in the thick fog that was found just off of Cape Race, Newfoundland. At first it appeared as though the Vesta had received more damage in the collision, but soon the captain of the Arctic realized that the ship was rapidly taking on seawater. He decided to abandon the Vesta and head for land in order to save his passengers, but once he left the other ship, the damaged Arctic continued to take on water, which then put out the furnaces and caused engines to stop working. This is when the captain ordered that those who were the most vulnerable be placed into the lifeboats first, but instead a number of crew and male passengers dashed towards the lifeboats, leaving hundreds of people to go down with the ship. There were about 400 people on board the ship that day, and only 87 of them survived. 22 of the survivors were passengers, and the rest, crew. The captain went down with the ship, but he managed to stay alive by clinging to some wreckage until rescue came. The other ship, the Vesta, did not sink and ended up making it to St. John's, Newfoundland. The crew members who abandoned everyone else on the ship were criticized for their behavior, which violated the laws that forbid sailors to put their own safety before that of passengers in emergencies. Despite this, however, none of the men were prosecuted for their actions. In our number 1 spot today, we have the RMS Lancastria. This ship was a British ocean liner, but in April of 1940, 1940, she was reconstructed to be a troop ship under the command of Captain Rudolph Sharp. He sent the ship off to help aid in the evacuation of British troops and citizens from France, and on June 14, 1940, the ship departed from Liverpool. On June 16th, the ship anchored near the town of St. Nazaire, and the following day, somewhere between 4,000 and 9,000 refugees loaded on board. This included civilians, soldiers, and other military officials. While carrying all of these people, around 4 p.m. on June 17th, the German Junkers Ju-88 the ship, which caused it to capsize and sink in an extremely fast 20 minutes. This caused over 1,400 tons of fuel to leak into the water, some parts catching fire, and while there were 2,477 survivors, no one is quite sure how many people lost their lives. This is because it was obviously a hectic rescue mission that had people rushing aboard. No one is quite sure just how many people were on board before the attack happened. It is thought that somewhere from 4,000 to 6,500 people might have lost their lives during this, which is truly a terrifying number.
At number 10, we have the Flying Dutchman. Yes, we'll kick off this list with a boat who the famous SpongeBob character is named after. It would be amazing if you guys could hit up the comments and leave me a ton of SpongeBob memes. That would be awesome. But in real life, the Flying Dutchman isn't a ghost, and Davy Jones' locker isn't a locker full of stinky socks. The Flying Dutchman was a real boat, and it was famously captained by Van der Decken. He was trying to sail all the way to the East Indies with his trusty crew. The old school sailor life would have been amazing, except for all the pirates and scurvy and drowning to death. Well, they hit a massive storm all the way at the Cape of Good Hope, and even though Van der Decken had one of the finest crew around, they were not able to make it through the storm. Now it's said that the ghost crew and the ship are cursed to sail the waters for the rest of time, and hundreds of fishermen have said that they have spotted the ship floating around the ocean fog. At number 9, we have Governor Parr. Alright, for this one we have something that is a little less exciting than a boat that is directly connected to one of the greatest cartoons of all time, but Governor Parr has its own charm. The ship was thrown together in 1918 and the world was never sweet to it. It was constantly under repairs, and in 1923 the ship was hit by such a large storm that it was nearly ripped apart and it was left unusable, and the captain was killed. This left the crew stuck on board with a boat with no way to get around, but luckily they were found. The Governor Parr was attached to a rescue vessel and they started to tow it, but not long after that the tow line was broken and the ship was lost forever. No one knows where the boat drifted off to, but some people think that the ghost captain is still on board, refusing to leave the ocean. But realistically it probably sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. At number 8, we have the MV Joyita. What makes a ghost boat a ghost boat? Does it have to go missing from all of humanity, only to ever be seen in the ocean fog? Or could it be a boat where all the crew went missing out of nowhere? Well, if you're unsure, then you need to look in here. Look in your heart. It'll tell you what a real ghost boat is. And I think this one makes the cut. The MV Joyita was found in 1955 with no crew and very little clues as to where everyone went. The dinghies and the logbook were all missing, so there's a chance that the crew took off, but what makes this one so strange is that the people on board didn't need to bail on the Joyita. The boat was lined with cork and had fuel containers on it. All these extremely buoyant items made the ship pretty much unsinkable, so why did the crew abandon ship, and what happened to them? There were also some blood-covered rags on board, meaning they could have been attacked by pirates or injured in a storm. But still, nobody knows. At number 7, we have Zabrina. This is such a beautiful name for a ghost boat now, isn't it? If I was getting on a boat named the Zabrina, the last thing I would expect is all the people on board to die and there to be zero explanation as to why. Well, I guess names can be deceiving because this cute little boat was a transport vessel for nearly over 40 years. She was built in 1873, and in 1917 she set sail through the south of France, probably to transport a bunch of croissants or something. Maybe not. I couldn't imagine a worse way to transport soft, flaky bread than a boat that was built in 1873. You couldn't deliver it. By the time it got there, you would just have a bunch of piles of slop and then some butter-soaked tears running down your face. Well, for whatever reason, the Zabrina was found floating around in the south of France with no crew, no captain, and no explanation as to where everyone went. The ship was in pretty good condition, so it didn't make sense that everyone would just get up and go. The theory is that a German U-boat snuck up on them, took the whole crew prisoners, but other people think that the crew is still sailing out there on a ghost boat. Ooh, ghost boats, that's what this whole thing's about. At number 6, we have the Lady Lovabond. This is a dirty story of betrayal, and nothing gets ghosts more worked up than having someone stab them in the back. Well, legend has it that this boat was set to sail in 1748. They were gonna do this as a way to celebrate the captain's upcoming wedding. What a nice celebration it must have been for him. Like, congrats dude, why don't you drive all your friends around a little bit? Nothing like working at your own party. Well, one of the captain's friends was also in love with his wife. wife. And he was super jealous. God damn, this is some good tea. So what did he do? Did he try to steal his friend's lady when they were all out on the water? No. Did he try to poison the captain and throw his body overboard so no one could find out what happened to him? No. He took control of the ship and then sailed it into the Goodwin Sands, killing everyone on board. My god, dude, I think you could have figured out a better way to deal with this. But still, amazing tea. This is very spicy gossip. Now it's said you can still see the boat sailing around the crash site. At number 5, we have the Jianseng. The Jianseng was a giant transport tanker that was discovered off the coast of southwest Queensland. When the ship was boarded, it seemed that whatever group of people that were on the boat left a long time ago. The ship was extremely run down and the engines were shot, but the weirdest thing was that the nameplates and identifiers were removed from the boat. Like whoever was on this boat or whoever was the cause of why this boat went missing didn't want anyone to find out where this boat was going or why. The only thing the people searching on the ship could find was a ton of rice. This is how they were able to determine that this was a transport vessel. While on board, the search party said they could hear strange voices and there was a constant presence that something was there watching them. No company, no country or person ever came forward to claim this boat. So when it was determined that this boat had no home, it was sent out to the middle of the ocean and then sunk. Damn dude, you didn't even strip it for parts? Just chuck it down to the bottom of the ocean? Seems like a waste. At number 4, we have the Octavius. Good old Otto Octavius trying to take down Spider-Man in pirate form. Actually, if that's a thing, if there's an alternate universe Spider-Man comic where he's a pirate, please hook me up with a link to that in the comments. That sounds like the perfect combination of dumb and cool that always makes my brain happy. Well, unfortunately, this story has nothing to do with Spider-Man. This boat was found off the coast of Greenland in 1775. It was just drifting along because the entire crew had froze to death. The whole boat was just packed full of icy zombies frozen in place. Well, don't get the wrong impression, they weren't like real zombies like walking around. They were just frozen to death so they looked all creepy like zombie. You guys get it, you understand. One of the creepiest things about this is the captain. He froze to death at his desk trying to fill out a captain's log from 1762. That means this frozen pack of Jack Sparrows have been floating around on the water for over a decade. At number 3, we have Carol A. Deering. I wonder who gets the job of naming all these boats because some of them are so dope, but this one stinks. Carol A. Deering? She sounds like she has a pencil case collection and complains about how Pepper has a lot of kick to it. Well, this poorly named boat was transporting coal from Virginia to Brazil. It was a good old working boat. It made the trip there alright, but something happened on the way back. The boat disappeared and then was found abandoned off the coast of North Carolina. The lifeboats were gone as well as the crew's belongings, but there was never an explanation as to what happened. Everyone on board was gone. It could have been a mutiny, but we really don't know. At number 2, we have the Caleuche. Here's a well-named boat, guys. Caleuche sounds like a dance you do to win the heart of your soulmate while simultaneously slapping a man to death. Well, this boat is part of the Aboriginal Chilean mythology. It's said that every night this boat would form off the coast, and apparently the boat is one massive party. It carries the souls of all the people who drowned at sea. That would be a great time. Everyone's dead and heading to heaven. It's like when you get super drunk on the plane heading to your vacation. Vacation starts early, baby. And at number 1, we have Mary Celeste. Alright, now we have la creme de la creme of ghost ships. It's of course the Mary Celeste. This boat is one of the most famous stories of ghost ships floating around anywhere. It was 1872 when the Mary Celeste was supposed to make the trip from New York to Genoa. She was carrying a ton of booze. It was around 1,500 barrels of booze. Enough to give every frat house in America alcohol poisoning. But Sweet Mary never made it to where she was going. She was spotted off the coast of Portugal. A ship went out to investigate, and much to their surprise, there wasn't a single soul on the boat. The lifeboats were gone, but the ship was completely intact. Nothing was wrong with it, along with all the booze. Every bit of booze was there too. So where did everyone go? Well, no one knows, and that's why it's number 1 on this list.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have the mystery of the mannequin boat. Following the Category 5 Hurricane Irma in 2017, a ghost ship washed ashore on Melbourne Beach in Florida. Mysteriously, the ship was intact, surviving the intense storm. Named Cucky, the 45-foot sailboat seemed to have traveled hundreds of miles before being washed up on the beach. No living soul was found on board, but 2 mannequins were found below deck, having survived the ordeal unscathed. What they were doing on the ship and what happened to the captain, sadly, we just don't know. Coming into number 9, we have the anonymous Jiang Seng. In March 2006, a slightly rusty ghost tanker ship was found off the coast of Queensland in Australia. She had a broken tow rope, which suggests that she was being towed by another boat and at some point broke loose. There was nobody on board when the Jiang Seng was discovered, but no signs of damage or piracy were visible. At first, sea officers thought the boat had simply got loose and were waiting for someone to claim it. When nobody did, they ran extensive searches of registered ships, but the boat had never been registered. When they checked the ship's engine, it was inoperable. Other than being identified as Jiang Seng, nobody knows where the boat came from. An Australian Customs Service spokesman said, "It really is a bit of a mystery, I'll say." Coming into number 8, we have the mystery of High Aim 6. On January the 8th, 2003, a Taiwanese vessel, the High Aim 6, was found drifting in Australian waters. More in Australia, what is going on? When the ship was broached, there were no souls aboard, yet weirdly, there were no signs of distress. The boat was tugged to shore in Broome, Western Australia, where a forensic investigation took place. However, no signs of the crew were discovered. All that was discovered were 7 toothbrushes and a cargo full of rotting fish. The boat's owner was contacted and he said he last spoke with the captain in December of 2002. One crew member, an Indonesian man, was later tracked down. Now, he didn't provide many details on his survival, but he did say that both the captain, Chen Tai Ching, and the ship's engineer, Lin Chung Lee, had been murdered. My goodness. Perhaps there was a mutiny on board, or there was a hidden motive, but nobody has ever been able to fully explain it. Australian smuggling specialist Craig Kennedy said, "I've been working with boats all my life and I've never seen anything like this. It's a bloody mystery." Sadly for the boat, it was later sunk off the coast of Broome. Coming into number 7, we have the SV Resolven. The Resolven was a Welsh merchant brig that was found abandoned between islands in Newfoundland by crew of the nearby HMS Mallard. Now this all went down in August 1884. The drifting ship was in a fine condition, and initially the Mallard signalled to see if the crew were okay. When they didn't get a response, they boarded the ship to find the gallery fire was lit and food had been laid out on the tables. The only thing was, there was no one to eat it. The ship had been completely abandoned. The ship's lifeboat was gone, as was the captain's stash of gold, leading some people to think that, you know what, maybe it was a mutiny. The most agreed narrative is that the crew mutinied, however that doesn't explain why the stove was lit and food was laid out and never eaten. It seemed like people jumped off the ship in an absolute hurry. Now the 7 crew and 4 passengers were never found, nor was any trace of the missing lifeboat. The Resolven case lay unresolved to this day. Coming in at number 6, we have the SV Carroll A. Deering. After passing Cape Lookout in North Carolina in January 1921, the 5-mast cargo boat became wrecked, and basically it was run aground in mysterious circumstances. Her crew and her logbook were missing, nowhere to be found. The mystery of the boat's final voyage is one of the most discussed and written about maritime mysteries of all time. Weirdly, when the North Carolina Cape Lookout lightship spotted the boat a few days before she was found abandoned, the captain reported a thin man with reddish hair and a foreign accent acting strangely. He also noted a number of oddly placed crew members. What happened to these people over the next few days remains a mystery. It is suspected that the ship may have been a victim of mutiny, as it had been reported that the crew didn't very well like the captain, with one worker previously arrested for threatening to get him. Others claim that she was a victim of the Bermuda Triangle. 5 US departments of government ran investigations, as the Carroll Deering was one of a number of ships to be wrecked or missing in a short period of time. No information was discovered to explain the wreck and the missing crew. It's still unresolved. We have a nice little urban legend for you to pepper the middle of this list. We have the ghostly galleon of Chapel Cove coming into number 5. I am a sucker for a good ghost story, especially when it involves pirates and treasure. In 1895, an abandoned ship dubbed the Ghost Galleon was reported off the coast of Chapel Cove in Newfoundland, a place I've categorically always wanted to visit. Now, this Spanish galleon was said to have been blown off course in the early 1700s and taken over by pirates. The pirates were said to have dispensed with the crew and took the treasure the Spanish ship was hoarding for themselves. Now, according to legend, they buried some of it in Chapel Cove. Now, newfies watching, don't be tempted to go and look for it. It is said that those who go in search of the gold will see a vision of the ghostly galleon and be visited by its dead pirates who aim to kill. Yikes. Coming into number 4, we have the SS Valencia. In January 1906, the SS Valencia was found wrecked off Vancouver Island in BC, Canada. The ship was struck. It had hit a reef in bad weather. Reversed, the crew noticed a large gash in the hull, so they ordered her to run aground to prevent her from sinking. She was stranded on rocks in horrible weather and separated from the shore by 50 meters of choppy water. 6 out of 7 lifeboats were immediately deployed against the captain's orders. 3 flipped while they were being lowered, 2 capsized when they were in the water, and 1 disappeared altogether. 2 groups of survivors made it off the boat, one in the final lifeboat and one by facing the tides and swimming. Of the 56 crew and 108 passengers, 136 people died as rescue teams struggled to get to the wreck. The survivors' awful tales of the ship floundering have marked history. Strangely, as the ship slowly sank, crew of the rescue ship, the city of Topeka, reported seeing the shape of the Valencia in the black exhaust. Reports of 8 skeletons dead in a lifeboat stuck in a cave emerged. Some people even say they saw lifeboats being manned by skeletons rowing in the water. A phantom ship was later spotted by sailors sometime after the sinking. Some even reported human figures holding onto the ship's rigging. Even weirdly, 27 years after the disaster, one of the lifeboats from the Valencia was found adrift in good condition. What happened to it over the past 3 decades, nobody knows. Coming in at number 3, we have the mystery of the Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste is one of the most discussed abandoned ships of all time and a key player in maritime folklore. The real-life story goes that in November 1872, the merchant ship set sail from New York. A month later, the boat was found near the Azores Islands, completely abandoned but in a seaworthy condition. Now, this seemed to rule out bad weather playing a role in the mystery. The ship was filled with a cargo of alcohol and had food and water supplies for 6 months. Again, this seemed to rule out pirates. Inside the boat, there were no signs of struggle or a fray. The ship's lifeboat was missing and the crew were never seen again. Now, this included the revered Captain Briggs and his family. Mutiny was considered as a possibility, but seemed unlikely given the ship's condition. Other theories included foul play by a giant squid and the Bermuda Triangle, or a curse of a paranormal going on, ghosts. The case of the Mary Celeste was so intriguing at the time that it has been frequently mentioned in literature and pop culture. Coming into number 2, we have the Sao. In February 2016, the private yacht of Manfred Fritz Badgerat was found floating adrift in the Philippines. Sadly, the vessel's captain and owner, Mr. Badgerat, was found slumped dead at his desk in the boat. But this is where things get very strange indeed. Badgerat's body was found mummified. Now, people presumed this mummification happened as a result of sea conditions, basically dry and salty air and hot temperatures, which is creepy but explainable. This kind of coincided with the rumor that the German national had been missing since 2009. In the cabin, a letter to his wife who died in 2010 was found, which added to the mystery. Now, his mummified body was found near the boat's telephone system, suggesting that he was perhaps trying to make a final desperate mayday call. The plot thickened still when coroners who performed his autopsy said that he'd only been dead for little over a week. How can we explain his lengthy absence and the fact that his body was mummified? There is almost no way that that could have happened in a week. Now, there are photographs of the state that his body was found in, but we can't show you them in this video. If you want to see them, you can Google them, but I have to warn you, it's not very pretty. Finally, coming into number 1, now this kind of shakes me to my very core, we have the North Korean death boats. Each year, it seems that scores of derelict ghost boats wash ashore in Japan. A number of these are thought to be as a result of poor equipment, leading to North Korean fishermen getting lost at sea and succumbing to the elements. The rest are usually the broken boats of deflectors who died in their attempts to flee the dictator-led nation. However, since 2015, more and more ghost ships with gruesome cargo began washing up in Japan. The grisly flotilla of 50 or so ships have washed up in the past few years, containing dozens upon dozens of bodies in varying states of decomposition. Some even arrived skeletal, suggesting they'd been dead at sea for a good number number of years. On one occasion, the corpses were even headless, further adding to the mystery. The boat's markings and the clothing of those on board identified the vessels as coming from North Korea. Why they're dead, and even more frighteningly, why some of them were mutilated, we simply don't know.